welcome everyone. A few things, if you can just mute yourself. You can also, just to make sure that you can hear John perfectly okay, turn down the camera until we have a chat in half an hour. We'll be very happy to have this discussion. And my name is Delphine Gibassier. I'm the academic director of the Executive MBA Chief Value Officer at Audencia. We have the honor to have John Elkington today, who is the inaugural speaker of our MBA Leadership Series. I think a lot of people have already joined, so we'll start, and the people will join in progress. So, John, the floor is yours. I'll cut my mic, and I'll hear when you tell me to switch on the next slide. I'll be there.
Thank you, Delphine, and hello, everyone. I'm looking forward to the discussion, hopefully, a little later. I'm sorry that this is a slightly odd format. I can't make Teams work to share slides today, so Delphine has kindly agreed or offered to change the slides. So wonderful to be part of this executive program. I don't have an MBA myself. I admire people who do. And I particularly admire Delphine's focus on the Chief Value Officer idea. But I'm going to talk about something related, but slightly different. And that is my sense that we are seeing not only a period of turbulence in capitalism, but a period where capitalism starts to evolve in some rather interesting new ways. So if you could possibly to the next slide, Delphine. So just by way of background, I'm 71. I'm a baby boomer. I've been in the environmental and sustainability fields for over 40 years. I've set up 4 what we'd now call social businesses since 1978. They all still exist. In 2008, I co-founded the 4th of those, called Volans Ventures, now based in Somerset House, which some of you will know, in London. The parent organizations were Sustainability, which was the 3rd company I co-founded back in 1987, and the World Economic Forum. Volans became the first UK or British B Corporation, and we're very proud to be part of that movement. And some of our clients are shown there. We're a very small organization, but we seem to work with some quite interesting organizations. So next slide, please. So I am an optimist. I couldn't have done what I've done over the decades if I hadn't believed that the world was improvable. I think COVID-19, the pandemic, has been an extraordinary shock to our politics, to our economies, to our communities and families as well. But the odd thing is, and I'm going to look at this positively, is that sort of shock is exactly what I think our species and our politicians and our CEOs and business leaders and investors and so on have needed for quite some time. So I'm feeling that the next 10 to 15 years are going to be distinctly different. So next slide, please. And when I say distinctly different, I think it will be a mix of good, bad, and ugly. So if I'm known for anything, one of the things I'm known for is the triple bottom line, which I introduced in 1994, so people, planet, and profit. And I shocked some people in the field a couple of years back when I did a product recall of the triple bottom line, not because I thought it was a bad idea, but because I felt it was being misused and misunderstood in many ways. And the remarkable thing was that the response around the world was one of shock, but also broadly very positive. And I'll touch on a little later on why I think the triple bottom line remains important, but framed in new ways. And the cartoon on the left there was one that I got a Financial Times cartoonist who still draws for that paper, Ingram Pinn, to do for me in 1991. And it just showed what I thought then was the goal that we're aiming towards, which was top teams, boards, C-suites, and so on, would have, in addition to the normal roles represented around the boardroom table, in this case, a voice for nature and the environment, including climate stability and biodiversity and so on now, a voice for the social agenda, represented by the woman in the middle. And then a sort of a joke at the time was the robot, to give a sense of long-term future. And it's not quite the joke that it once was, because quite a number of you will know that in 2014, the first expert system was appointed to a board. It happened to be in Hong Kong. And I think increasingly boards will have to have expert systems to help them deal with the complexity of the challenges that they increasingly will face in this area. So next slide, please. So I know Delphine likes the work of the Future Fit Foundation, but when I started off with the triple bottom line, the diagram on the left was pretty much where most people's thinking was. That was the Milton Friedman world, and environment and society were off out there somewhere. Sometimes you'd bump into them, but not very often, you would hope. In the middle, you have the Michael Porter, Mark Kramer proposition, but based on Jed Emerson's work of shared value. And that's where you increasingly had an overlap between these different forms of priority and value too. And on the right, you have Future Fit Foundation's view of where we need to head next, which is where business is central if you're in the world of business. But it's wrapped around by society, which in turn is wrapped around by the biosphere and the natural environment and so on. And I think that very simple graphic capture of where the agenda is going, I find quite useful. I hope you do as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned Milton Friedman. He was a genius in his way. I think he was an extraordinary thinker. He had an unimaginably great impact, not just in the United States and over the last 50 years or so. But I think his time is fading in many ways. I think the proposition that business is only in business to profit, given that companies hopefully would meet the regulatory requirements of a particular society, that's no longer adequate. And I think many business leaders now are aware of that. And this was a Financial Times front cover about 2 years ago. And increasingly we've seen these calls for capitalism to be regenerated, to be reset, and so on. Next slide, please. So in April of last year, my 20th book was published, called Green Swans. It's on the right. It's very much inspired, to begin with at least, by the work of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, shown in the middle there, and particularly by his book, The Black Swan, which many of you will have read, came out in 2007, and just before the 2007-2009 financial crash. And increasingly, he was seen to have called that out. And what he was talking about, as many of you will know, is the black swan basically is something that takes us completely by surprise. It comes out of the blue. It has an extreme off-the-scale impact. And very often afterwards, we think we've understood what's just happened to us. And very often we've misunderstood. So we set ourselves up to fail all over again. Now you'll see that the subtitle of my book is The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism. So next slide, please. And I think some people will have felt that that phrase, regenerative capitalism, was almost a delusional. How could capitalism, which is basically degenerative in many ways, ever be regenerative? And yet, in September of last year, this man, Doug McMillon, CEO of Walmart, world's largest retailer, announced and committed Walmart to becoming a regenerative company. It's been extraordinary since then. I mean, Walmart have an upcoming event for the CEOs of major suppliers, and CEOs only. And the key theme is regeneration. And we've seen companies like Nestle and Unilever and all sorts of people becoming quite anxious about, what does regeneration mean for us and our business model and so on? Where are we doing that sort of thing already? So this thing is developing, I think, quite rapidly. Next slide. And when people ask me for what is a green swan, people around the world have been saying, I'm a green swan, my brand is a green swan, my company is a green swan, and so on. And we've seen people in places like Indonesia and the Philippines having their business cards printed and saying, that they're green swans. That's not really our intention. In the book, I talk about Greta Thunberg being an unusual example of an individual who has had a green swan effect. So this is systemic. It's again off the scale. It's positive exponential change. And so when I'm asked that question, what is a green swan? I quite often will point to, for example, the EU Green Deal. You will know that that's 1.82 trillion euros worth of potential funding. Very political, very politically charged, but nonetheless, the level of ambition is extraordinary. And the fact that alongside this sort of exponential progress ambition, you've got the social inclusion agenda alongside the decarbonization and cleaning up of our economy agenda. I think that's very encouraging. Next slide. And so most of the work we do is with business. And one of the things we've seen since 2015, when the Sustainable Development Goals were launched, is a lot of companies basically going through the process of saying, what are we already doing? And how does that map onto the Sustainable Development Goals? 17 goals, 169 targets, all of that good stuff. And one of the things we've been trying to remind people of is that if you simply look at the first two goals, no poverty and zero hunger by 2030, those are super exponential goals. Now, you can ask the question whether they'll ever be met, or particularly within that time scale. But even if you push this way out, another 3 or 4 decades, these would still be exponential and systemic goals. So I'm just raising the question whether we all, in the work that we do, are thinking about those goals in the right sort of framing. Next slide, please. Could I have the next slide? Thank you. So this is just the sort of diagram that we've all got quite used to seeing. It's cost curves, in this case for solar energy, but you could do the same for wind, you could do the same for battery technology. And what we see is in the timescale that the Sustainable Development Goals cover, the cost of renewable energy is likely to come down quite dramatically, and that's on top of existing dramatic falls, and then become even cheaper than electric power from already installed fossil fuel plants. So this is the sort of trajectory we're tracking from our new Green Swans Observatory. Next slide, please. Yes, this is one that probably many people in the audience will have seen, which is just exponentials have this ability to surprise us. Our brains really are not configured or designed to deal with them. We're much better at dealing with incremental change. And the problem with exponentials is they tend to explode out of seemingly nowhere. And our sense is this is an exponential decade where all sorts of issues, not just the pandemic, but that's an example, are going to come at us and really, really challenge our brains and our politics and our management systems and so on. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that we do when we work with companies is to try and pull through some of the next generation of talent. So this is a Spanish company, but it operates globally, Actiona, in infrastructure and renewable energy. We worked over the last year with 27 of their younger people, fast-track executives from around the world. And the project started off as a 5-year master plan roadmap for sustainability. By the end of the project, with the consent of the board, it was a 10-year master plan and roadmap for the company as a whole. And I think we've got to pull younger people in at every level of decision making. Doesn't mean that they're infallible, doesn't mean that they always know better, but actually we've got to bring their perspectives in, and we've got to train them up as fast as we possibly can. Next slide, please. But that doesn't mean abandoning them and older people like me retiring. We've all got, this is a pan-generational challenge. We've got to address it in that sort of way. This is the final slide, I think. The cover of The Economist is from 2011, so 10 years ago. It's where many people in business first heard about this scientific label of the Anthropocene, a period of our collective history where for the first time in the history of our planet, one species, our own, is influencing the planet on the scale of geological forces. So that's the context, I think, and the scientific paradigm is shifting, and these periods of paradigm shifts bring all sorts of disturbances and consequences, but I think it's immensely exciting. And on the right, you have, with no time scale, you can think about what time scale you would put on it, but for me, this would go out into the 2050s. You have in the sort of the violet or purple color at the top on the left, the old order, which we've all grown up in, which is post-World War II. It's shaped by Bretton Woods and the Marshall Plan, all of that good stuff. But what we've got now is a period where the order, geopolitical and macroeconomic, is starting to change quite profoundly, and that's going to accelerate. And then in the third wave, which starts at the bottom, that dark blue wave, and going into through the 2030s and into the 2050s, you've got something very different coming through, if we're lucky. It's an economy, it's forms of geopolitics which act in very different ways. And we think that we're going from a world of responsibility, which is where we had CSR and shared value and all of those good ideas, to a world where regeneration becomes the core focus of our economies, our societies, everything that we do. In the middle, you increasingly hear political leaders, business leaders, investors talking about resilience, about the resilience of individuals, of families, of teams, of organizations, of supply chains, of the economy, right out to the biosphere. And the only way that you can actually generate or deliver resilience over time is by regenerating and investing in the systems on which we all so critically depend. And that's the challenge that we all now, I believe, face. Let me just check what the last slide is, Delphine, if we might. Oh, so this is probably the last one. So as I mentioned briefly a moment ago, we set up a Green Swans Observatory. It will launch later this month to track the regenerative economy around the world. Lots of different partners coming into that process. And the four sectors, the four focus areas to start with are cities, because that's where we pretty much all live now, or most of us will live within a few decades. Electricity, because that will power the future in many ways. The soils, water, agriculture, food, diets, nutrition, and health nexus, and money, because the question is, where does the finance for all of this good stuff come from? And one of the things I think we will need to look at in relation to financial markets is the role of accounting, and perhaps, again, here, the role of chief value officers. So I'll end there, Delphine, if I may. There is a last slide which just simply says merci, thank you, and I'll now very happy to take any questions or comments, but back to you, Delphine.
Thank you very much, John. That was a very good introduction to a discussion that we can have now, and then we'll take questions from the audience. You have a chat. I would urge you to write your questions there, and then we'll pick them as they come in and see how the discussion can flow. But maybe I'll start with a question. The executive MBA that I created is for chief value officers. We had the discussions when in another forum in December, and when I was reading your recall, you said it's the triple bottom line was way more than an accounting tool, and not maybe to be perceived as such. And maybe I wanted to have your thoughts on what you meant in '97, what it means today to the world.
So thank you. I mean, the original idea, when I came up with it in the mid 1990s, was I saw business very comfortable or increasingly comfortable with the idea of eco-efficiency, which is you make or save money by saving energy and by cleaning up pollution in the right way. And all I was trying to say was all of that's good and it's worthy, and it's, that's where engineers like to focus. But it's not just financial, it's economic, and it's also social. And many companies at that stage, particularly American companies, did not like dealing with the social parts of the agenda. So the triple bottom line was in part a provocation. It was just saying, have you thought that there might be other forms of value that you might be covering? Now, over time, I was involved in the founding of the Dow Jones Sustainability Indexes, the Global Reporting Initiative, the International Integrated Reporting Council, and so on. And a lot of good work was done to encourage companies to report across the triple bottom line, sustainability reporting, whatever we called it. But my concern, and that's really what drove the recall, was that much of that reporting was not going very far in terms of investors were using some of that stuff, but really not at a level to justify all of that investment and effort. And we really needed to have disclosures and transparency and accounting that properly covered off these different dimensions. So I still think the triple bottom line works. I think it's useful. But I think increasingly we've got to think about it in those three different domains. Responsibility, which is where most of the effort is focused to date. And that's, the responsibility agenda continues to expand. We're now talking about wealth divides. We're talking about access to public health care, including vaccinations. We're talking about tax evasion and avoidance, these sorts of things. So the responsibility agenda continues to expand, but this resilience and regeneration agenda, I think, is where increasingly we've got to focus more of our effort. And that's across the triple bottom line, but it's not primarily driven by it.
That's very interesting that you ended by not driven by it, and sometimes the space for accounts or measurement system is not well understood in the perspective of change. The book of Tonamido's System Change does say that it's part of the leverages that we can use, but only part of it. And you also mentioned in your recall that the concept at some point only led to incrementalist strategies. That's a bit what annoyed you, I think. And you mentioned system change and now regenerative capitalism can actually, if we think of all the new accounting system, including Future Fit, can they actually bring system change? Or if not on their own, what is needed across a company to do so?
Well, let me just respond to you reacted to my comment that the system change would not primarily be driven by accountants or accounting. I mean, they play a very useful role. I don't deny that. But you and I first met, Delphine, I think through Novartis, where I chair this Impact Valuation Advisory Council. And what we're trying to do there, and what a great number of companies are interested in doing, is trying to see how you merge different elements of the triple bottom line, and you put, for example, a financial value on social and environmental outcomes. Now, I think that's a worthy pursuit. I think we've got to try those experiments. But in the end, there's a limit to how far in today's world and today's reality and today's paradigm we can sort of put a financial price on sort of climate stability, because our species for a very long time has not had to deal with climate instability. And when we have, pretty much every time our civilization has collapsed. So how do you use conventional economics or even stretched economics and accounting to take that into account? And I think when I think about system change, it sounds for most people, no, that's beyond my pay grade. I don't know how to do system change. That's not what my MBA taught me. I'll leave that to politicians. Well, the problem is politicians don't know how to do it either. And I think what we now have with the pandemic and this incredible global insult to our politics and our economics and our economies and so on, you have suddenly, for the first time in my working life, an opportunity to drive very different systemic processes, solutions, and so on. Question is whether we can now step up collectively and make that happen in good time and good order, or whether we default to the old ways, the businesses the business as usual, the government as usual sort of formulations. And I think this time round, the shock has been much bigger than previous time rounds. It's come into people's personal lives, and I think that's an opportunity.
Actually, there is a question, and I noted in your slides that the GDP was to disappear as a metric. It's still a metric. And one of the things that people were very disappointed with, and during the first confinement in France, there was a lot of groups getting together to say we need to reshape things and we need it different. And then overall, I think in the world, the green and the brown type of investments, the balance is not in the right direction. Unfortunately, the rebound is seen as to be economic first, which of course would lead to employment, where there has been a lot of people losing their job. But the massive change that people were calling for has not been seen, or maybe you have, or what do you think the governments can do in this movement, especially after COVID?
Well, I think there is a very real risk that we do go back to the old ways of thinking and the old ways of responding to these sorts of crises. On the other hand, I think there is a different generation of leaders coming up, particularly in business, and in some ways more in business and the investment field than it is in politics and government, although I think we'll see the same trend there. And in a way, what's happening is quite often because of the failure of national governments and international government entities, you've got the focus going down to city level and so on. So city mayors and so on. And for example, in the United States, I'm involved in a growing number of circular city projects, starting in Chicago, but then gradually moving to different parts of the United States. And I'm very excited by the way in which different levels of influence are starting to sort of come into these spaces. And in the same way, I think we're seeing CEOs of major companies profoundly shaken by what's just happened to their businesses, and at least for a period open to other ways of thinking about this. Just finally on GDP, I should just declare and admit that I went to university first time around in the 60s to study economics, and I gave up economics after 1 year in 1968 for reasons that some people might remember. I mean, it's sort of an extraordinary year, but really because economics and GDP and GNP and all these formulations did not focus on and did not capture social and environmental value. Now, I take great comfort from the fact that people like Kate Raworth and Mariana Mazzucato and a range of different economists are now coming through, and perhaps no great accident that a significant proportion of them are now women. But I do think GDP will go to the wall. I do think we'll have different ways of calculating value. And just that three horizon model or diagram that you mentioned a moment ago, Delphine, that's not our analysis. I mean, the three horizons we put up there, but that's a series of companies that we've worked with, several days, their teams coming together and the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and it's data points and projections coming from those sorts of organizations. Average age of those people, probably somewhere in their 40s. Average age of people in boards and C-suites now, probably in their 60s to 70s. And in that sort of couple of decades, you have a huge potential to think differently and to drive different forms of change.
I'm going to take questions that are coming up and that are very interesting. There was a question about regeneration system value will be spearheaded in the global north, the global south, or will be an equal mix of both. And I'll just add that, especially also in the MBA, I think accounting for sustainability or reporting or different values is very cultural in many ways. And also that can be seen as some way unequal in the way it has looked at things.
Yeah.
And maybe you can reflect on that question coming up from the audience.
What's interesting, I mean, I said earlier on, I'm speaking at a very big conference in Brazil this evening, and in the preparatory meeting, one of the questions I was asked was, Brazil has a fairly weak automotive manufacturing sector, and it's just weakened further because Ford, I think, has withdrawn its operations from the country. And the question I was asked was, can Brazil ever produce the electric vehicles that we will need in future, or will we be totally dependent on what happens in the wider world? And my answer was not comfortable for me or for the people, which is on the call in Brazil, which is that when we have these very big periods of technology-driven disruption, the activity and the wealth creation tends to pop up in certain areas of the world, and in a way, it's gone progressively westward. It started in China, it went to the Middle East, it then went to various parts of Europe, then it jumped to the East Coast of the United States, then it went to the West Coast, and now it's going back to China and Asia again. And that's the way these things play out. Now the question is, can we do the politics such that when the wealth is created, it's distributed in ways that are broadly inclusive, that people get educated and all the rest of it in appropriate ways. So my answer would be, I don't think innovation of the scale that we're about to see or beginning to see happens uniformly around the world. That's not the way innovation happens. But we do need a different form of politics, a different form of democracy, if you like. One of the things I say in the book is that economics is now and capitalism are now under existential pressure. Democracy is now under existential pressure and being disrupted. And I think the next candidate for disruption is sustainability as an agenda, as a way of thinking about how we do this. Because in a sense, what's happened with sustainability, it's been captured by business and others who have a very narrow version of what needs to happen. We've now got to expand that out. Now, final point there is that I think it's just as likely that that expansion will happen and the on-the-ground innovation will happen in non-global North countries. So for 20 years now, I've worked with social entrepreneurs through the World Economic Forum, the Schwab Foundation, the Skoll Foundation, and so on. That was the background for us setting up Volans. And there are some extraordinary people doing social innovation. But what's coming now is not simply social innovation, it's technology and business model driven. And there, I think, inevitably, many parts of the global south will be, at least for a while, left behind. Not comfortable, but I think it's the reality.
There is also another interesting question on triple bottom line for SMEs and how fast exponential would the imperative of future fit be for smaller enterprises?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? And 20 years ago, I was routinely beaten up by colleagues and at different parts of the world because we were largely focusing on large companies. And the reason we were focusing on large companies like Ford or whoever it might be was because they had very large supply chains. So Ford had, I don't know from memory, 14,000 significant suppliers and probably a lot more now. And we felt if you could get a big company to change and cascade through its supply chains, you'd affect very much larger numbers of companies than if you just work with 3 or 4 SMEs. Now, that was in the days when, you know, SMEs were just happened to be smaller, but were still trying to do the same things as the big companies. And now what you see is that it's from the SMEs. Think about Tesla 15 years ago. These things start small, but they have the potential to explode out into the wider world. What are we talking about now? 500 models of electric vehicle on sale by 2023. I mean, the big, and Tesla worth the same as the 5 biggest automotive companies. So at least markets currently tell us in their current fevered state. But I think SMEs have become much more interesting because that's where a lot of the disruptive, edgy innovation is happening. So we're starting to work with more of those people, but it's always going to be a tension between, can you work with the smaller people who probably won't be able to pay you, or they'll pay you in giving you some of their shares, which we've heard from 3 or 4 companies, or will you work with big ones? And sometimes we cross-subsidize the work we do with the really interesting people by working with some of the big incumbents.
And the question that will bridge the gap between what we've been saying and maybe the MBA, a question from Inger in Norway about how can ordinary, and that's the word she uses, accountants can get on board.
Well, the first thing would be, depends where they're working. Is it in the public sector? Is it in the private sector? Is it to some degree almost in the citizen sector? And the first thing is to say, get the right education, go to the right schools. You know, if you're going to have an MBA, go to Audencia or whatever and get the right skills and background. But then join the right organization, and you know, which, regardless almost of which sector it's in, because the cultural context of accounting is incredibly important. And the leadership of organizations can very often mean the difference between, you know, greenwashing or doing marginal improvements versus people who are really trying to stake the future of their enterprises or organizations on the sort of change agenda that I think we're talking about here. I also think get involved in networks. It's very easy. I mean, there was a period when everyone was talking networks, and you had to network like mad. But networks remain incredibly important, and they're a good way of meeting people in other walks of life in your profession or outside it, of learning from people who are really sort of at the experimental leading edge. But again, I don't underestimate the need to change the professional bodies and the industry and trade associations, because so often they're a negative constraining force on evolution. And I think in my own country of ACCA, an accounting body, and they've been consistently experimenting, innovating, and so on, but they're still a rarity. And so put pressure on your professional bodies and threaten to resign. Or, you know, it's amazing how a few voices bringing that sort of pressure on can actually capture top level attention. The danger is then you're asked in to say, now tell us, all right, you've got our attention. Now what are we going to do? What do you want us specifically to do? Be prepared when that call comes.
Thank you very much. I think we've gone through the questions we had. If that's okay, thank you so much, John, for being with us today. I'll jump into the presentation of the MBA for about 10 minutes. So I'll share my slides again. And it's basically about that. I'm prepared, and I've been talking to ACCA and other bodies for a while, trying to move them in the right direction. I think one of the key points that I'd like to point out, trying to go back to the no, it's not the one I wanted to share. This is the PDF. Sorry for this. I'll be there in a few seconds. One of the most important thing I think is that it's not about cramming everything into what accounting is today. I keep saying, and I'm actually getting a bit worried about how accountants are taking it. And historically, accountants have been known to take things that they have seen, such as standard costing, as 100 years ago, and then from engineer backgrounds and put that into account. Today, I'm a bit worried that we are trying to cram sustainability into accounts, and I keep saying we need to become hybrids, and we need to expand accounting instead of trying to make sustainability fit into accounts. That's a very big difference between what we do in the Executive MBA and what I do in my research and in the research center, and what a certain number of movements around accounting standards are happening right now. So my name is Delphine Dubassi. I'm the academic director. I'll just present a few slides about the Executive MBA Chief Value Officer and why we have created a degree entirely driven for tomorrow's world. Normally, you would see options. You might see a few hours here and there. Here you have 503 hours of completely new designed courses, practice-based with world-renowned faculty, designed for the change of business models, strategic change using newly built accounts. So what is the advantage of the MBA CVO? For me, it's anchored in tomorrow's world. It's the first time, and Audencia had also the courage to do this. This is not easy. It's not something that you will see in many of the business schools today. The courage to say we need to do it full. For the entire program, right? And we are building the content often from scratch with the help of world faculty. It's strategic thinking and forward looking. It's not about yesterday. It's not even about today. It's about tomorrow. It's about shifting your vision, your political vision of multi-capital accounts on how does that how can that be the foundation of the value you create or you destroy, or what you need to know for tomorrow. And it's based on real case studies from business organization, practical implementation and proven methodology, and the latest methodology as well, as we are being accompanied by including Geoff Kendall from FutureFit, who's going to be one of the first to introduce planetary boundaries and social foundation in the first week in September. What's in it for you? Learn from the best. It's the first worldwide MBA on that topic, Executive MBA. And that's an advantage because we were able to get also the best experts. So you'll learn from people who have 20 to 30 years experience working with companies. So there are, of course, academics who work with companies, but also a lot of practitioners, people who have been involved in standard setting, in methodology setting, in working with company, exactly like John. And that content you can use immediately. It is very focused, and we have designed that, as you can see at the bottom, with ICAEW, a Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, the Capitals Coalition, and the WBCSD. And when we worked with them, the first thing they said, it needs to be implementable on Monday. Right? You do the courses on Saturday, Sunday with us. On Monday, you'll be able to go to your boss, to your team, to your company, and lead the change. That's very important to us. And I really hope that you'll be able to see this. And of course, the network of the world faculty that you have, the network of Audencia MBA alumni, the network of that you'll do with the people around you in the MBA, and of course the people that will get you across to listen to through the MBA Leadership Series. Applications is today. It's now open until the August 27th. It's an 18-month part-time program. You can stay in your company and work during the week, and then do the MBA on Saturday, Sunday. There are a few weeks in person, but 65% is dedicated online. It starts in September, all in English. What about Audencia and why would you join Audencia? Audencia is the 6th best business school in France. It's also, and more importantly, very focused on CSR and sustainability. One of the first schools that signed both the Global Compact, then the Principle for Responsible Management Education, considered as one of the 30 best schools in the world in that area. And we have over 5,000 students today, 136 faculty, going up to 200 to 2025, and a very strong, world-class faculty in sustainable business as well as sustainability accounts. The MBA is actually linked to the research center, which has partners such as Danone and L'Oréal and PricewaterhouseCoopers, and you will benefit also from the research that is being conducted in that research center. What is it in it for you? It's about value creation. We talked a lot about value. It's about positioning yourself as a key player in your organization and acquiring the capacity to measure, communicate the value creation process of your organization. It's about what we call integrated thinking, and that's also why I really think we need to expand our view in terms of what is financial accounts, what is extra financial accounts. It's about integrated thinking. It's about anticipating and understanding your financial, but also your societal implication of your decisions to become a change navigator and supporting the evolution of your company's business models. Of course, there's lots about methods and techniques of measurement, control, and reporting. I'll give a few examples. We'll talk about poverty footprint. We'll talk about biodiversity accounts and water accounts. Yes, and we'll talk about techniques such as life cycle assessment, but most importantly, why do we use them? What's the strategic use of the numbers you'll get? Why would you use this technique rather than another? And all the case studies we have built for this MBA are really designed and discussed with the actual players of those case studies about the strategic use, the positive and the negative elements related to all of those methodologies. We'll go into international new technologies, and we will work with someone who has created his own company based on artificial intelligence in the ESG world. And of course, you'll be able to use all of that to network. The skills that you will learn is to measure the multi-capital performance, to be an expert in reporting and audit in accounts. But more importantly for me is the strategic thinking. And we have a course, which is a flagship course that you'll take in October 2022, which is about the transformation journey. Is how do you get from, from the beginning, the accounts to the leading the change in your business model with an integrated and systemic vision. There are 4 modules. The first one is Sustainability Fundamentals. You can go back and look at the different system thinking and different courses you'll take. Do Not Economics. John, you talked about Kate Howarth. We have 21 hours dedicated to really rethinking economics. We have a responsible and transformational leadership session. We have a measurement, control, and audit of integrated multi-capital performance module. And the last module is international and contemporary dimensions with 2 trips that I'll talk about in a minute. So we have the chance to be able to connect with Ivy Business School and Inkai Business School in Costa Rica and Canada, both the leading business schools in their field, in their country. And both learning trips is to be able to meet people in practice. So when we are going there, you'll meet investors, you'll meet people who have created the first a carbon compensation project in Costa Rica. You'll be able to meet people who are currently working on biodiversity impact bond in Ontario. You'll be able to meet the people who actually create and make those different accounts today. And then you have 2 major projects, and it's part of what we do in MBAs, but I think it's also a very important way to operationalize what you're doing. So you'll have a consultancy project with an SME for 12 months in teams. You'll respond to an SME's problems related to the transition with numbers and accounts, but more importantly, it's about the transformation of their business model and what they want to be in the future. And then you will be able to do your own final individual project. This is for your company, yourself, if you're not in a company, as a consultant for a new service you'd like to do. And you will be accompanied by one of the world-class faculty member for 18 months, and you'll present and write a small thesis on the results of your project at the end of the MBA. We have the chance, like to have John today, we have the chance to have Mervyn King opening the MBA on September 6th. For those who don't know Mervyn King, he has been involved in integrated thinking in the GRI, the IRC, and most importantly in sustainable governance for many years. And he will be with us on September 6th from South Africa to talk about his view on what needs to change. And he's also, and most importantly, the man who coined the Chief Value Officer term that we're using for that MBA. For whom is that MBA? Of course, we've talked a lot about accountants, auditors, internal auditors, but it's also for CBU managers who want to acquire the competence in strategic measurement. It's also for board members. We had those discussions with board members, business angels, CFOs, of course, and CSR managers who want to maybe move to a more strategic role that includes knowledge of financial measurement, but also marketing, supply chain with a link to sustainability. To join the MBA, the executive MBA, you are required to have a minimum of 8 years of relevant post-graduation, full-time work experience, and 5 years of managerial responsibility, a bachelor degree or a Bac +4 if I'm talking in the French arena, or a full ACA advanced level from ICAW. This is a special agreement we have as a partner in learning of ICAW. And you have to be fluent English. The MBA is full in English, so this is a requirement too. And if you'd like to join, you can contact Christine Guérin, our talent manager, in French or in English, or myself, of course. I'm happy to deliver any question or answer any question you might have. And this is it for today. I'm so happy that we were able to have John Elkington with us. And really thank you for everyone being online. I think we had about 51 that joined us, John. So that's a very good sign from our COVID online webinars day. So thank you, everyone. Do stay in touch. And John, I hope we can continue to work together in the future.
Thanks, Delphine, and I very much hope so too. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a nice afternoon.